It was one of the greatest moments in human history. It's that moment when Neil Armstrong stepped out onto the surface of the moon, and it will be remembered for as long as humanity exists. In July, in just a few weeks, we're going to mark the 50th anniversary of this event. Now, when I was growing up, I'm just a little younger than this. I wasn't alive yet for the actual landing. But the moon landing, it set a tone for everything. It was this idea that anything was now possible. Now, in my elementary school, we had this little rock. It was a little moon rock hanging when you came in. And it was in this big plaque. And every day you walk into the school, and it was this message that if we can make it to the moon, we can do anything. And learning was the tool to get you there. And so I think I and like lots of other kids, we all wanted to grow up to be astronauts. And I would build model rockets, the ones that you'd launch up and they'd have their little parachute come down. They had a Saturn V, but it was way too expensive, so I never built that one. But I had a lot of model rockets. But as the years went by, people began to wonder, did that really happen? Back in 1969, when the moon landing happened, there were less than 5% of the people, a statistical, within the margin of error even, of people believing that the landing was a hoax. 35 years later, when we entered into the new millennium, 26% of the people, 1 in 4, now believe that the moon landing was a hoax. And there are many, many conspiracy theories out there. And in fact, on the cover of your bulletin today, I selected this picture on purpose because this picture is one of the key evidence and one of the things saying that there was a hoax. This is prime evidence that moon landing deniers give.
Number 1, the waving flag. One of the most infamous Apollo 11 conspiracy theories involves the pictures of the American flag taken by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. In the iconic photos, the flag appears to be fluttering in the wind, which is admittedly odd seeing as how there's no atmosphere and by extension no wind on the moon. The reason Old Glory appears to be waving is because Neil and Buzz made it so. A wire was inserted in the top of the flag to keep it steady, and the astronauts created the waving effect as they were setting it up. In fact, once the flag was planted, it stopped waving completely.
It was one of the greatest moments in human history. The resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth shaped the lives of billions of people on the planet. It offered a vision of a better way of living for all people. And it's been roughly 1,989 years since that event. And this morning, millions of people in places like this, all around the globe, will come together to worship in the name of Jesus in every nation, in every language. But as the years went by after the events of his death and resurrection, people began to wonder, did that really happen? And about 50 years later, the gospel writer of the gospel we know as Matthew addressed that. There were conspiracy theories about it.
Now, as the women were on their way, some of the guards came into the city and told the chief priests everything that had happened. They met with the elders and decided to give a large sum of money to the soldiers. They told them, "Say that Jesus' disciples came at night and stole his body while you were sleeping. And if the governor hears about this, we will take care of it with him, so you will have nothing to worry about." So the soldiers took the money and did as they were told. And this report has spread throughout all Judea to this very day.
Human nature is consistent. And if there is one thing that we learn in every generation is that people will lie. That deception is a reality. And we've been told that facts are arbitrary. You may have your facts and that I have my facts. And so when we are faced with something that is amazing, something cosmic, we have reason to doubt. And even though hundreds of thousands of people worked on the Apollo project, many of whom are still alive today, even though that there are dated historical sources that record the events of Easter, people doubt. And when you become jaded, when you witness so much intentional deception done by people who are in power, doubt seems reasonable. A few weeks ago, a young woman questioned me about how anybody could believe the Bible. And she told me, she said, if, after all, you believe that the world was created in 7 days, I'm more comfortable with a scientific worldview. Now, personally, I always enjoy it when somebody tells me what I believe. I love that. Because it's not that simple. The reason I study the Bible constantly is because it's really complex. It's not a book. It's a series of writings that have been, some of them, were there to chronicle history to the best that they could at that time. Some of it was written as metaphor. Some of it, the prophets, were social commentary. It's this huge mix. And this young woman, she was under the impression that to be Christian, you had to take every word of the Bible as fact. Photographs get altered. Video gets doctored. Biblical manuscripts have gotten lost. And it becomes difficult to separate fact from fiction. There was a time when facts, things that had evidence that showed them to be accurate, facts were generally accepted. But when evidence can be fabricated so easily, we have moved into a new time, a new era of alternative facts. So that when you witness something that is amazing, your first reaction might be, wow, that looks so real. Did that really happen? When faced with moon landing deniers, the Apollo 17 astronaut Harrison Schmitt said, and this is a quote from him, if people decide that they are going to deny the facts of history and the facts of science and technology, then there's not much you can do for them. For most of them, I just feel sorry that we failed in their education. He's a geologist. He went to the moon. He walked there. He later became a United States Senator. And he was so frustrated that there were people who were essentially calling him a liar for claiming that he walked on the moon. Now, he had evidence. He was a geologist. He had rocks. He had his own eyewitness accounts. He had film. Yet it didn't matter. We live in a time where evidence can be so easily fabricated. So when Harrison, 6 years ago, said that he believed that global warming was a communist plot, even despite all of the overwhelming evidence, a lot of people went, huh. Even a person, a scientist, a geologist, at some point we make a decision about who and what to trust. So what do you do with this? Living in a time where evidence can be easily fabricated, when facts are used to deceive, what do you do in a time such as this?
Faith is the reality of what we hope for. the proof of what we don't see.
These words were written in a very particular book of the Bible. And they were written in the book of Hebrews to convince Jews that Christianity was essentially an upgrade to their religion. And it's a book, it's a letter really, but it's a book in the Bible that honestly I take with a grain of salt. And yet there are these wonderful insights in it too. And this is one of them. In an age of alternative facts, of fabricated evidence, of deception, the concept of faith has value. There was a time, and maybe some of you remember it, when generally accepted facts, those things that were supported by solid evidence, were the way that we viewed the world. We wanted to see the world that way. But that worldview proved to be less than solid. It proved to be less uniting than we thought it would be. And there have been lies. There have been hoaxes. And people with a good editing tool can create narratives with evidence in order to claim that the facts were on their side. But faith has always been different. Faith is trust. In fact, in Greek, the Bible, the word is identical. It's pistis. It's the same thing. Faith and trust are the exact same thing. We choose to trust. We choose what or whom to believe. Looking to the past, have you ever wondered why Jesus didn't write anything? He had years. He obviously could read and write. Why didn't he write anything? Why did the gospel writers, why did they wait decades? In the case of Matthew, 50 years later, why did they wait to write down the story of Jesus, the gospel, the things that we know as the Gospels? Now, in the ancient world, the trustworthiness of a story was based in the character of the person who was telling the story. If you heard a story from a trusted friend, from a source that you knew to be reliable, that carried a whole lot more weight than the written word. Because written stuff, it could come from anywhere. You didn't know who wrote that. But when it came from the mouth of a trusted person, then you had something real. So when the decision to write the Gospels, when that happened, it was because those trusted eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life, those sources that you could trust, they were getting old and dying. Writing was a backup of their experience. This is the same reason why we've got letters that were credited to the Apostle Paul, which clearly he did not write. Paul was a trusted name, and it wasn't considered plagiarism at that time to write in his name. It was a way of honoring and saying, this is trustworthy because it has Paul's name on it. Today that sounds horrible, but then it made sense. We've been pretending now for a few generations that an evidence-based scientific worldview and a faith perspective, they're at odds, and maybe even opposites. But what I'm coming to think, that the opposite of faith isn't doubt, it's certainty. Any good scientist will tell you, science doesn't prove anything. Anyone who's ever said, science proves, they're not a real scientist. Scientists can provide strong evidence that points toward facts. Science can be trusted. You can choose to have faith in what science demonstrates. Likewise, if you have a religion that is based on a sense of certainty that it knows the will of God completely, that religion is not faithful. That religion is an idol that claims to be God. Good religion and good science should always have a sense of wonder, of curiosity. Good religion and good science should engender a sense of trust, of faith. When they don't, when they claim absolute certainty, it's probably safe to assume that human ego and power are involved. So I think that now, 50 years after human beings walked on the moon, and they did walk on the moon, it is time now to move past the illusion that faith and science are at odds. Now is the time to recognize the role of trust, of faith, of what and whom we trust. Because here's the thing, there is so much amazing, so much wonderful in this life and beyond that God has given us to explore. And there will always be doubt. There will be doubt in religion and science, and that is so much better than the deception of certainty. This is my hope for our future. Will you pray with me? God of wonder, bless us with doubt, because only then can we have faith. Bless us with science to explore how this universe works. And may religion continue to explore the questions of why.